Few battles in the Pacific War encapsulate the raw brutality of island hopping like Peleliu. For the United States Marine Corps, it was meant to be a quick, violent seizure of an airfield, a necessary stepping stone, or so the planners believed, before the major invasion of the Philippines. But for the men of the 1st Marine Division, and especially for a young mortarman named Eugene Sledge, Peleliu became something far darker, a lesson in suffering, a descent into a world stripped of order, mercy, and humanity, a landscape where the dead rotted in the sun and the living walked a razor's edge between sanity and collapse. To understand the battle through Sledge's eyes, you have to first understand the mission and how catastrophically the planners misunderstood what awaited the Marines on that coral rock. In September 1944, the United States was driving west across the Pacific. MacArthur demanded the recapture of the Philippines. Admiral Nimitz believed the American advance required neutralizing Japanese air power in the Palau Islands. Peleliu, a tiny coral island less than 7 miles long, contained an airfield capable of threatening the eastern flank of the upcoming Philippine landings. The mission seemed straightforward on paper. Land the 1st Marine Division on Peleliu's southwest beaches, seize the airfield within hours, secure the rest of the island within 2 to 3 days. General William Rupertus, commander of the 1st Marine Division, was confident, recklessly confident, that the operation would be tough but brief. He famously predicted the island would fall in 3 or 4 days. What no one in the U.S. command understood was that the Japanese had abandoned the old doctrine of suicidal defense on the beaches. Their commander, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, had crafted a new method: turn the island into a labyrinth of interlocking caves, tunnels, bunkers, and kill zones, forcing the Marines into a grinding, attritional nightmare. Sledge, still new to the war, had no idea he was about to step into hell. When the 1st Marine Division hit the beaches of Peleliu on the morning of the 15th of September, 1944, the landing immediately devolved into one of the bloodiest opening assaults of the Pacific War. Sledge and the men of K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, boarded their amphibious tractors and headed toward Peleliu's blazing shoreline. The heat was suffocating, the sky was blinding, and a wall of artillery, smoke, and flame shuddered across the coastline. In With the Old Breed, Sledge describes the sound of the naval bombardment as a constant concussive roar, like a thunderstorm that never stopped. The Marines had seen bombardments before, but this one shook their bones. And yet, the Japanese had survived it. As the landing craft moved closer, the illusion of safety evaporated. Mortar fire began plunging into the water. Machine guns opened up. Shells burst overhead like cracks of doom. Everything that could explode did explode. Sledge noted the shock of seeing amphibious tractors ahead of him burst into flames, Marines spilling into the surf, struggling in full gear as bullets whipped the water around them. When K Company finally hit the beach, they were met with a vision of chaos. Exploding shells, burning vehicles, men crawling through sand already stained black with blood. Sledge described the sand as if it were alive with metal, constantly erupting under mortar fire. He threw himself down, hugging the earth, feeling coral fragments slice into his flesh. The air was hot, choking, filled with dust and smoke. The landing plan collapsed almost immediately. Peleliu's beaches were narrow, constricted, and overshadowed by high coral ridges that provided perfect fields of fire for Japanese machine gunners. Sledge writes of the moment he first felt absolute terror. The feeling of being pinned, unable to move, watching men fall all around him, while invisible gun barrels raked the sands. The Marines clawed their way past the beach obstacles, trying desperately to escape the killing ground. The heat was already unbearable, over 110 degrees with no shade. Canteens warmed to the temperature of bath water. Sweat evaporated instantly. The coral dust coated everything like flour. The Japanese defense was methodical and calm, a shocking new experience for Marines used to banzai charges. On Peleliu, the Japanese stayed hidden, firing from multiple openings, forcing the Marines to fight for every yard. Once small units of Marines pushed inland, they faced the next stage of the nightmare, the airfield. Exact numbers vary slightly by source, but the most credible Marine Corps records show roughly 210 to 220 Marines were killed in the first few hours on the beaches. Over 1,100 were wounded during the initial landing. Entire companies took 30 to 40% casualties before they cleared the sand. Some platoons lost half their men within minutes. Amphtrax burned on the shoreline like funeral pyres, and bodies lay scattered across the tide line while the next wave stumbled forward into the same killing fields. Sledge wrote that the beaches looked as though a giant scythe had passed across them. And that wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was literal observation. Most of these deaths happened within the first 90 minutes, as Japanese anti-boat guns, mortars, and machine guns raked the narrow landing zones from elevated ridges overlooking the shoreline. Despite the carnage, the Marines did secure the beachhead, but not quickly and not cleanly. In practical combat terms, the beaches were not truly secured until the end of the first day, roughly 8 to 10 hours after the first wave landed. Even then, secured is generous. The Japanese still fired mortars, sniped from the ridges, and shelled the beach area for days afterward. But the Marines had pushed far enough inland to prevent another mass casualty disaster on the immediate shoreline. Although the beaches were secured by dusk on D-Day, the Marines were too shot up and exhausted to launch deep attacks immediately. For Sledge, the landing on Peleliu felt like diving headfirst into chaos, but the scale of the slaughter on the beaches was far worse than anything the Marines had anticipated. The planners expected resistance, yes, but no one imagined the Japanese had transformed the island's coral ridges into a perfectly engineered killing zone. Only after securing the beaches, after nearly 8 to 10 hours of unrelenting combat, could the Marines begin the second phase of the operation, the advance on the airfield. What followed was a nightmare, just as savage, just as unforgiving. A descent we'll uncover in part 2 of our 3-part Battle of Peleliu series, through the eyes of Eugene Sledge.